Good morning. It's a joy to have you here today and to celebrate this Sunday of preparation as we get ready to enter into Great Lent. Great Lent is upon us once again. As an aside, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever gone through the process of spring cleaning? You ever done spring cleaning before? You open up the windows after being closed during the cold winter months, and you go through spring cleaning. You dust out the windowsills, and you give the house a real strong cleaning as you get closer and closer to warm weather, because it's so nice to have the windows open and the breeze coming through. I remember my grandmother going through that process. Well, brothers and sisters, in our Greek Orthodox faith, for centuries the church has understood the power of spiritual spring cleaning. And that is exactly what Great Lent is. It is an annual opportunity for us to take spiritual inventory of our hearts, to take seriously the call of our faith to practice our faith on purpose, to be orthodox not just in name but in action. I find that revelation to be more and more powerful for me personally. And the reason why it's so is because our reality in this country is this. It's easy not to be orthodox in the United States. It's easy. It's hard to be purposefully orthodox in our country. We see that in the reality of our children staying connected to the faith. Second, third, fourth, and fifth generation Greek Americans have watched as their children and their grandchildren have left the Orthodox faith and gone on to either be nothing at all or to be what we priests lovingly call hatch, match, and dispatch. You know, that we see them when they're baptized, we see them when they're married, and we see them at their funeral. That's it. Hatch, match, and dispatch. I know, it's cute. It gets a laugh in clergy retreats. It gets a laugh in clergy retreats, I'm telling you. Or they become part of other churches. And this, brothers and sisters, is a demographic reality that if we ignore it to our own peril. The fact of the matter is, the reality of the Greek Orthodox faith in the United States is that from 1972 to today, marriages and baptisms in our church have precipitously decreased to a point where we have parishes in this country. I talked to a priest at the latest clergy retreat. Do you know how many marriages he's done in the 5 years he's been in his parish? Ladies and gentlemen, demographics determines destiny. If we live under the foolish, blind delusion that we can ignore the reality of our world, we will pay a terrible price as a community. We are already paying a terrible price in our community. The desire is to affix blame. Well, whose fault is it? If it makes you feel any better, it's my fault. Okay, does that help? It's my fault. It isn't about assigning blame. It's about waking up to reality. No one who has a serious disease will ever be healed unless he or she is willing to accept an honest diagnosis. Thank you very much. Tonos. Unless you get the right diagnosis, you're gonna die. If you aren't honest enough, if you aren't courageous enough, if you aren't brave enough, if you aren't humble enough to accept that diagnosis, you are going to die. If that's true in your physical body, how much more so is it true in a community of men and women who have forgotten why they exist? The moment you forget the why of why you're doing this, The moment that slips from a person or from a community or from a people, when you forget the why of what you're doing, trust me, soon you'll lose the what as well. And brothers and sisters, this is not an arguable fact. All we have to do is look at the generations of churches that are now becoming empty. And this isn't just the Greek Orthodox. This is Christianity as a whole in the United States. And it flows from one of the great, powerful reasons that Great Lent exists in our Greek Orthodox faith. Every year the church invites us to revisit the why of why we're Orthodox. I have to ask you, had you not been born in an Orthodox home, would you have become Orthodox? I don't ask you to answer that question out loud. Think about it. If you hadn't been born with the spiritual head start of Orthodoxy, would you have converted to Orthodoxy? Can I tell you a dirty little secret about we converts? Did you know that our second generation kids are just like the second generation of kids in homes that grew up in Orthodoxy? And the reason for that is this, precious friends. The second you forget to transmit the central why of your faith, that is the seed of your irrelevance and disappearance. Do you want orthodoxy to disappear from the lives of your children? Do you? Of course you don't. Then, brothers and sisters, we must begin to offer our children the central why of our faith and not merely the accoutrements and the costumes of our precious, life-giving, unparalleled beauty of our Greek Orthodox faith. We must preserve the why of our orthodoxy, or we will see our children go someplace else. Because, brothers and sisters, people do not buy what you do. People buy why you do it. There's a coach, a high school coach in Memphis, Tennessee by the name of Bill Courtney. And he made an interesting statement. He said, you think football builds character. He was in a high school. He became the high school football coach of a team that hadn't won a game in 14 years. Now, I don't know about you, but that's discouraging. Season 15 roll around, the expectations aren't real high. You know what I'm saying? They had not won a game in 14 years. And Bill Courtney, who was actually a local hardware store owner in Memphis, took on the challenge. And he began whipping these boys into shape. And he said, you think football creates character. And it's not true. Football reveals character. It's the same way with adversity in our lives. As we look at the demographic realities of our faith in this country, most of us have experienced it firsthand. You know kids that used to be connected to the church that aren't anymore. You know them. Some of them may be even your own children. Adversity does not create character. Adversity reveals character. And it is the singular wisdom of the timeless Greek Orthodox faith that gives us the gift of Great Lent to refocus our lives and do the spiritual spring cleaning and the spiritual inventory necessary to stay awake to the numbing power of focusing on secondary things rather than keeping the why the central part of who we are. This morning, you've heard the story you've heard your whole life. You know it by heart. The prodigal son. You know that story. Those of us who grew up in other churches, we know that story too. Because we used to sing little Sunday school songs about it. I won't bore you with one, but we used to do that. And the prodigal son is famous. And we've heard sermons about the prodigal son. And we've heard sermons about the older brother and the mistake he made. And we've heard sermons about the father. But the interesting thing about the story of the prodigal son is that it was in the midst of adversity that the prodigal son, what does the scripture say? He came to himself. Isn't that fascinating? Isn't that an interesting turn of phrase? He came to himself. Now I must ask you, why is it that it takes tragedy or trouble to wake us up? Why do you think that is? Isn't that a pain? Isn't that a shame? Why does it take trouble? Why does it take heartache? Why does it take disappointment or bitterness or anger? Why does it take that to wake we humans up? Well, I'm convinced, ladies and gentlemen, it's because the primary statement I just made to you, adversity does not create character, it reveals it. And God, brothers and sisters, pay attention to this. This is going to be on the final. God knows that until you know yourself, you will be a slave to the world's draws and addictions. Until you do the work to know yourself internally, you will never understand the why of the faith. Until you have the courage to do the internal work, not to have outside circumstances to create your character. It's never going to happen, folks. Outside circumstances are never going to create your character. Outside circumstances are only going to invite you to do the interior work necessary to wake up and know yourself so that you can embrace the fullness of the faith dropped in your lap by the grace of God. And that's the reason why the power of the prodigal son and the parable of the prodigal son still resonates in our hearts today. Because it is one more invitation by our precious and life-giving faith to get to know yourself. When you have the courage to get to know yourself, you will begin to know God and you will love Him. Until you know yourself, you will be the elder brother. And you won't love God. You'll just obey, hoping to get something. Isn't that interesting about the older brother? Father, what is this I hear? Dancing and making merry. It's your brother's home. Why, you've never given me so much as a kid to celebrate with my friends, and I've never disobeyed you. Isn't that interesting? The why was the problem. The older brother obeyed his father out of either guilt or shame or fear in hopes to get something. How many of us have done stuff and said, okay, God, I was a good boy. Where's my treat? God, I've followed you all my life. I go to church every Pascha, every week. Why don't you give me goodies? God, I've said religious words. You have to let me into heaven. Isn't that interesting? It's the why that is the heart of the illness of our spiritual growth and our spiritual maturity. We miss the why and we'll miss the Lord. So I want to challenge you this morning. Don't be like the older brother. Know yourself. Come to yourself. Use whatever is going on in your life right now as not a burden to be borne, but an opportunity to be learned from, so that you might become so acquainted with yourself that you'll finally be able to be honest about your need for God. It was only when the younger son came to himself in the midst of his poverty that he realized, I have sinned against heaven and against you, Father. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Just make me like one of your servants. But what did the father do? You see, the father knew the son before the son knew the son. No, you're my boy. You bring the best robe and put it on him. Give him a ring. Kill the fatted calf. Let's celebrate. He's home. He's alive. This morning, on this preparation Sunday for Great Lent, don't miss this chance. Don't let it slip through your fingers. Take advantage of it. allow the wisdom and the beauty and the genius of our Greek Orthodox faith to teach you how to know yourself so that you can enter into Great Lent knowing how to repent, knowing how to be humble, knowing how to be honest and not live in the delusion of I'm okay, you're okay, or I'm not as bad as that person. Abandoning the temptation to compare yourself with others and knowing yourself. Because it will be when you do that hard work that you'll be free. This is what our Greek Orthodox faith invites us to embrace. Freedom, peace, joy. Don't you want to be free? Don't you want to be at peace? Don't you want to be so rested in God that no matter what life throws at you, you can rest. You can be okay. Wouldn't that be wonderful? And nothing shakes your confidence. Nothing shakes your peace. You don't get your feet knocked out from under you by life anymore. You're at rest. You trust God. Wouldn't that be a great life? That's what you're being offered today. Say yes.